And it was all true. Now, why were they doing that? Well, most of the people have no knowledge of these subjects whatsoever. I'm not a Middle Eastern expert. I don't even claim to be an expert on these topics. But I looked into it enough and read enough books to get a general idea of what was going on. And it was kind of obvious. Well, of course, the CIA is going to arm the radical Muslims because they've been using and doing that for a long time, even prior to 1979 in Afghanistan. How did I know that? Well, I read Miles Copeland's Game of Nations book, where he has an entire chapter about the usefulness of extreme Islam and their terror to the West. So they talk about it in their books. That's how I knew. I'd also read a leftist book at the time. No, actually, this was before that. No, it was about 2013. I read Joseph Trento's book about the usage of Islam. Now, he at one time had these books that he wrote that were kind of good critiques of the CIA and these kinds of moves and operations. And then he went like full just Democratic Party line. And every now and then you'll see people that do this, Webster Tarpley, people like this. They'll put out books that admit a lot of things, and then suddenly they're just 100% insane, pushing everything that the Democratic Party pushes. So, for example, and we're just using Islam as one example of this. I read this book back in 2007 or 8, Prelude to Terror, Rogue CIA, okay, by Joseph Trento. This came out in 2005. I read it probably 2010, 11, somewhere in there. And this book talks about using and honey trapping people, especially prison Muslims, black dudes in prison that get into Islam. They're usually brought into or utilized by these kinds of operations, right? It's not that complicated, not that difficult to figure out. One example is if you have, let's say you have a genuinely organic movement that begins to rise up, that is some way politically or religiously politically affiliated. As it gains prominence and members and attention, what the establishment power structure will do is they will begin to send people in, whether at the base level or trying to befriend the leaders of the movement or through money and funding. They'll send people in who are there to subvert, to radicalize, and steer it off course. Right? It's kind of common sense, right? It's kind of a COINTELPRO chaos, Operation Chaos for the CIA during the Vietnam War protests. They did the same stuff. And you'll have the people that suddenly show up and they're fighting with everybody and they're saying, oh, we need to take it to the next level, and we need to engage in, violence, right? Well, you're not really into the movement unless you're ready to do this. Okay, that's all provocateur stuff. It's pretty obvious, but you would think it would be obvious. People fall for the same dumb thing over and over and over and over, especially dumb right-wingers. The right-wingers are as dumb as the left-wingers and the Muslims who fall for the same thing over and over and over. It's amazing. I can't understand how you'd be this stupid, but they're this stupid. And they also wait until there's a new crop of young right-wingers who get radicalized online, who are brought into the same stuff, and they fall for the same stuff. I've watched it since the 2000s, people falling for this stuff. And you'll even have people who get caught, get busted, change their lives, become Christians, and admit that they were entrapped, and it still doesn't convince people. The people are still too stupid. So there's a never-ending train of dummies that fall for this stuff. Another easy way to, if you don't want to read all these books, you could watch the Newberg Sting documentary, which I believe is still on YouTube, and it's just one example. This is a 2014 film. We're watching this when it came out. And it demonstrates how these people at this idiot mosque were entrapped. They may have taken down the full documentary. Let's see. And you had these like, it's a bunch of black dudes that got into Islam in prison, and when they came out, they joined this radical mosque in like New Jersey or somewhere. Okay, and they were told that they were going to lead this jihad against a local military base. I mean, this is so stupid, but like, they literally thought they were going to go get bazookas and go after a military base. And of course, the police busted them right when it happened, right? But that's how this works. And this has been going on for a long time. And even people in the comments are hip to it. They're like, this same thing happened in Portland, Oregon, where with the Christmas tree, BOMBER. The FBI entrapped him and took praise for busting this. Yeah. So this was a big racket back in the 2000s where they would just run these honey trap things. They were so obvious. But people fell for it. And if you see that, you notice this model, okay? If you watch the documentary, they bring in some Muslim dude from the Middle East. I can't remember if he was Iranian or Syrian or what he was, but he was an obvious operative. And he just set all these people up, and then he flew away. The same structure and the methodology, they do the exact same thing. So they'll do the same thing to the far right. They'll send in these people. They'll do the same thing to the far left, you see. The patterns and the means and the methods are the same. It doesn't change. Now, this is the radical Muslim side of things. And by the way, I'm not saying it's always the government. It's always entrapment. No, there's plenty of idiots who will do this crazy stuff on their own. But sometimes it is entrapment. We saw a similar situation with the Bundy Ranch. The Bundys were kind of naive Mormons who believed in imminent, or they were opposing eminent domain back at the time, right? And they had this standoff supposedly with the feds, which was all like a stupid. There was like multiple phases of this standoff. Anyway, eventually that whole thing fell apart because they fell for the trap to stand off against the feds in some cabin out in the woods. It's so stupid, like the way this. It's so obvious you would think people would get it, but it's a never-ending scam that never fails. So, well, I would say never fails. Sometimes it doesn't work, but so these are some examples. No, Ammon Bundy and the ranch, the Bundy Ranch standoff, not the Bunny Ranch. Okay, these are all. I've heard this joke a million times. I went out there at the second time with Patrick Henningsen to help him with a documentary. So I saw a lot of this because there was a 1-year anniversary rally of the standoff over the land that they have grazing rights to. These Mormons have grazing rights to. But what had happened was that basically the feds had sent in people who were their security. They hired security without thinking about it or being very smart, and these people were feds, and they were able to kind of agitate and agitprop a lot of this stuff and get people falling for the trap, basically. Yes, Cliven Bundy, exactly. It would have been interesting if Patrick had made his documentary, although he would have had to like shift the entire documentary into dealing with the standoff in Oregon. I think it ended up in Oregon, right? Anyway, the Bundy stuff was its own whole saga. It was crazy, but you could watch like how the establishment, how the feds were planning it. It's like a 1, 2, 3. It's like a 3 acts of a play that they had planned out. It was pretty wild to watch how they did it. Yeah, grassroots normies, unfortunately, they fall for this stuff because they're ideologues. They really believe the positions, and they naively will accept people that come into their movements or into their sphere as if they're also totally ideologues as well, and they just have no knowledge of how this stuff works. So those are some examples that we see in other domains of religious engineering, we could call it, which has many dimensions to it. So those are a little more extreme with direct CIA arming and funding and training with al-Nusra and this kind of stuff, or entrapment through fake mosques and this kind of stuff. But we want to step back a little bit and get a little bit of the historical picture of this whole domain